Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? We're all right? All right. Well, my name is Logan Churchwell. I am the Public Relations Director for True the Vote. I've been with the True the Vote team since the beginning of July. I'm a bit of a newcomer to the group. Before that, I've been working all across D.C. in various nonprofit and Capitol Hill offices, specifically working in media relations and trying to get past what the mainstream press is saying about all of us. I mean, if they're to be believed, I must have stumbled into a Klan rally if you read some of the stuff that's out there. Show of hands, how many of you have been told by friends of yours or you've heard in the press that there's less than 1% chance of vote fraud occurring? All right. How many of you are told that voter ID laws will negatively impact minorities at a factor 1 out of 10? How many of you can tell me where those two statistics come from? We have one hand. They come from the Brennan Center. It's out of New York University. Both of those were considered scholarly research. However, they were using the same data that various Democrat campaigns are using to get out the vote measures together. It was completely partisan research used for a partisan study. But you don't see that in the Associated Press and Time Magazine and Newsweek. You just see those two statistics, and therefore they must be true. Now, we're going to get into why those issues are incorrect. But what I want to talk to you today, though, is just about what kind of talking points you're going to see, whether it's friends and neighbors of yours or reporters that might call you once you get involved in this effort, or if you already are, what you can expect out of talking points during an interview or just person to person or while you're on the job at the polls, and some tips and tricks on how to get past those interviews and get your message out. I'm here to give you the ammunition. Everyone else is giving you kind of the keys to how to work at the polls, but I'm going to give you the ammunition on how to fight back whenever you're being challenged in person. So, what are the vote fraud deniers saying out there about you and about what you're doing? First of all, voter identification laws, they're pretty much like poll taxes and a kickback to the Jim Crow era. How many of you have heard this? Yeah. You know, we heard last night that it doesn't really matter what we have to use as an argument against the other side, as long as it can intimidate you, it can scare you, it can make you change your ways. And this is exactly what I'm talking about, and this is exactly what you heard last night. You're seeing the race card being played right out of the gate against your effort. Oh, hang on. Let's keep going. 10% of all minorities would be negatively affected by voter ID requirements. Still, more of the race card. This is just right-wing attempt to suppress the vote because there's Barack Obama is in the White House. How come this didn't happen during the Bush years? All of these things, though, they're so shallow of a criticism of what you're doing, and it just goes to show that the facts are not on their side. We heard at a recent panel that we held in D.C., Attorney General Alan Wilson said that when you're pleading a case, especially an election law case, if the facts are on your side, pound the law. If the law is on your side, pound the facts. If you don't have either on your side, just start banging on the desk. And that's what we're seeing. People denying the facts, they're denying the law, and you're seeing the race card being thrown against you at every which way you can see it. Photo ID is a solution in search of a problem. You're going to hear that one a lot, but once again, the facts just aren't lining up. Now here are ours, and I'm going to go through them. We'll take our time and make sure we all understand them. Photo ID is a device for equal protection, not suppression. Now, there are some buzzwords in that might not mean so much right off the bat to you, but they are very constitutional, very well-grounded in our beliefs in liberty and so on. Yes? Is that printed anywhere we can take it home with us? Excuse me? Is that printed anywhere we can take it home with us? When you sign up in the True the Vote portal, that will be in the media section. I update talking points, quite often, things that I'm hearing in the press, things that you can come to expect. So pretty much everything you're seeing in these slides will be posted into the portal, probably today. So, and also, if you have a question during this, please just raise your hand. I'll call on you. There's not a specific Q&A period. Voter ID is a device for equal protection, not suppression. This is one of those arguments that you can make that's full of good constitutional buzzwords that also strikes right at the heart of those "you're a racist" talking point. And Archer Davis says this perfectly when he holds up his ID card and says, "This is not a billy club. This is not a barking dog. This is not a fire hose in your face. This is protection for my vote. This is what our country has gone through such a painful period over for decades, things that we have tried to correct over time, and this is how I can protect all that we fought for and all that we have gained." And that's what voter ID needs to be. When you're called a racist because you want someone to show photo ID at a poll booth, all you have to say is that you are protecting the fact and the idea that when they go to the polling place, their ballot's waiting for them. Someone else didn't take it from them. It's not been stolen. A dead person is not going to cancel their vote out. It's there, it's protected, and that's how you face the race argument right off the bat. You are protecting everyone's right to vote. You're protecting the sanctity of that vote because that failsafe is there. It's not a cure for the problem, no. But like John Funn said last night, we want to make it harder to cheat. And this is one of the easiest, most effective ways to do it. And guess what? Almost the entire country is already there. How are you not living right now without an ID card with your picture on it? Voter integrity efforts promote good government. Now, people that are on the vote fraud denying side, government's a good thing. We must continue to grow that. The economy sucks because we're not spending enough on government, right? We hear all of these things. Well, we can take that and twist it and put it back on its head and say, well, if you want bipartisanship, if you want compromise, if you want good legislative work in Congress and in the state houses, you have to take away the possibility that the election results before all of that was fraudulent. Good government starts at the polling place. Government accountability starts in the polling place. This is what democracy looks like. We heard that in Occupy Wall Street chanted over and over, people in the streets. This is what democracy looks like. No, it's not. Democracy looks like a legitimate polling place with voter identification. And as you can kind of see as we go through these, the purpose of how I drew these talking points together was to take exactly what was coming back at us, put it on its head, and hand it right back to them. We're using their own language, the denier's language, against them. Minority voter turnout has increased in states such as Indiana and Kansas where voter ID is required. We learned this at our Heritage panel earlier this week. Might have heard it last night with Mr. Funn's speech as well. And it's just a plain fact. In states such as Indiana and Kansas, and by the way, Indiana put their voter ID law up. It was challenged in the Supreme Court. It was upheld by the most liberal justice. He wrote the opinion, John Paul Stevens, wrote the opinion defending Indiana's voter ID law, and Barack Obama wasn't even in office yet. And since then, turnout in minority neighborhoods has increased. Question? There you go. According to the Wall Street Journal, you can add Georgia to this list as well, where you're seeing, because of voter ID, you're seeing higher turnouts in the minority vote. Yes?
Do you know the cause of that? What causes it to increase?
I can't give you a scientific answer, but I can give you analytical answers I've heard elsewhere. And one big cause of this, and this is the same reason last night why we heard Rhode Island pass their voter ID laws, it was because black Democrats were saying, look, and they were the ones that got it passed in Rhode Island, not a right-wing country, not by a long shot. The reason you're seeing people changing their mind on photo ID, especially out of minority politicians, is because there's a good chance that they might not be the machine mainstream candidate. And so when they're looking at their get out the vote method, they have to say, okay, I know the machine guy is going to get this much. I know there's going to be this much fraud. So I've got to find a way to get my guys out so I can overcome the fraud and what's going to happen with the machine candidate. So why not just take the fraud part out of the equation and say, okay, how can I beat this guy on his ideas alone? And that's where you're seeing in states like Rhode Island where, like, look, I'll go with photo ID. I don't have to worry about fraud. I don't have to worry about people getting bussed over state lines, registrations over state lines. I don't have to worry about that anymore. I don't even have to play the game anymore. I just have to beat the guy on his record or their beliefs. So it's really, overall, it's a practical answer. If I can just beat them on the beliefs, I don't have to worry about the fraud. I'll take photo ID. Arthur Davis is saying that. 2 black Democrats in Rhode Island that made that bill happen are saying that as well, and you're going to be seeing more of that in the future. All right. Attempts to, I went over this one already, but states that passed photo ID laws back during the Bush years, going back almost all the way to 2004, Indiana, Georgia, and South Carolina, they've all done this. Now, many of them are still being held up in the DOJ preclearance process. Many of their officials are saying that they're dragging their feet on that. But all you have to know is that whenever someone says to you, why the rush now? Why all of this in 2011? Is it because there's a black man in office and you're scared? No. Indiana, Georgia, South Carolina, they did it when Bush was president. And here's, when you're looking at all of these and you hear these arguments coming at you and when you're putting it right back at them, listen carefully to how they phrase their arguments and their questions, because many times you're going to hear people arguing in an absolute position. Voter fraud does not exist. No state is bringing this up because they care about election integrity. Photo voter ID and other integrity measures have grown in popularity after the Acorn expose. That's another way to beat what's the rush argument. Also, why 2011? How come it's now? And to expand upon that, you just say, look, it was not in the American conversation, photo ID and vote fraud. We knew it was there, and before that, anyone that claimed fraud at the polls, who can tell me what the first thing the media is quick to paint them as when someone claims fraud? Racist. Go back a little further, too. How about sore loser? If you claim fraud, doesn't matter what level you're on, you were pretty much called a sore loser almost immediately. You could have been called racist, you could have been called all those things, but you were called a sore loser first. And it's for that reason that decades went by where fraud was occurring. We knew it was happening, but we couldn't always put our finger on it. But it was shown how large a scale it could happen on when Acorn was exposed. And that's why it happened during this Obama administration. It's not because he is in office and we want him gone, because that's not what we're here for. We're here for free and fair elections. But it's because the curtain was lifted and we saw just how easy it is to perpetrate this kind of fraud. And guess what? We're all paying for it. Our own tax dollars are making this happen. So what's the rush? Why now? Acorn. That's all you have to say.
Yeah, Logan.
Yes.
These are the same people that think that, Bush stole the election from Gore. So it's kind of hypocritical for them to come across the way they do.
I'm not saying any of their arguments are logical.
Right.
Yeah.
And, one of the conversations I've had with folks, especially media folks that have come at me with some of these talking points that you're talking about, is I ask them, in what country would you take the election results seriously if people voting didn't have to prove who they were and could only vote once, and that they lived in the place they said they were going to live in? And every time you turn that around to a media person, they understand it, and they're like, oh yeah, we wouldn't legitimize that election. Well, then you're saying we don't have to do it here? I mean, they're completely hypocritical in their name.
And I'll take that one even further. Most common question I get from a reporter right out the gate is, how prevalent do you think vote fraud is? And my question back to them is, how much vote fraud is acceptable to you? And just a tip, if you're doing an interview with the reporter, and you've got to pay so close attention, and we'll do tips and tricks later, but you have to pay such attention to how they're framing these questions on you, because whenever Fort Lauderdale Sun-Sentinel called me a couple of days ago wanting information about this event, question was, is True the Vote supporting the illegal purge of voters in Florida? Not the illegal voter purge, or you know what I mean. It's early. That's how the question was asked. And I had to literally get out Section 8 of the National Voter Registration Act and read parts of it to this reporter saying, no, Florida's following federal law. It's not illegal what they're doing. They're actually required to do it. If they weren't doing this, it would be illegal. But pay close attention to how questions are framed at you, because they're trying to trip you up. All right. Some other good points to just kind of have in your pocket ready to go. Pew Research Center estimates that 13% of our voter registry nationwide is inaccurate. That means and we're talking about 2 million names that are completely illegitimate. They could be dead, they could be felons, they could be anything under the sun. They just aren't allowed to be voting, and that's allowed to stand right now. Always a good reason to say that when you give those numbers out that it's from Pew Research Center, because the people, vote fraud deniers and their allies, they are not quick to attack Pew Research Center. Since 2000, there have been voter fraud convictions in 46 states. 46 out of 50, you have voter fraud convictions. So when you hear less than 1% chance of vote fraud occurring, how is that so when only 4 states in the union have not convicted anyone of vote fraud? Over 70% of Americans believe there is a problem with voter fraud in this country, and that's the conservative poll. If you look at Rasmussen, PPP, all along any of the polls, you're seeing at least 70%. People want photo ID. Question?
Logan, if I could, let me add on the Rasmussen poll. Not only does it say that over 70% of Americans believe that there's a problem with voter fraud, it says more than 8 out of 10 who claim to be Republicans, 7 out of 10 who claim to be independents, and just under 7 out of 10 who claim to be Democrats. This is not a partisan issue. This is an issue that is believed across all political views in our country.
Absolutely. And when it comes to issues that have a national conversation component to them, which this one is, healthcare reform would be another example of a national conversation, there is no need for rhetoric, political rhetoric in this discussion. When you're with a reporter, when you're with your neighbor. Yes. Well, that's the difference between 70 and 80. Rasmussen's coming in at 80. Likely, a registered's coming in around 70. But, as I was saying, there is no need for heated rhetoric, no need for partisanship, no need for making hack comments at someone when you're standing up for voter integrity. The facts and the law are on our side. The other guys are pounding on the table and pointing fingers and calling names. Let me see here. Okay. So I'm going to give you some homework to do before we get into tips and tricks and dealing with interviews. Go home. Actually, this is the easiest way to do it. If you do not receive our True the Vote newsletter, it is free. It goes out once a week. You can go on our website, sign up for it. If you do so today, you'll get that email in your inbox. And in that email is a link to the Brennan Center study, their most recent study that says 1 in 10 minorities will be negatively affected by voter ID. It's only about 12 pages, and it is not a dense piece of writing by any means. It's actually, you kind of feel bad for the guy who's writing it, because this is a perfect example of someone who wrote the forward and the conclusion before they actually looked at any data. But I want you to read it because the media won't quote it usually, but that is the document for why you should not be doing your job here today. And it is outlined in there. The facts and figures are all there. And if we're going to move into tips and tricks now, there's a good chance. Yeah, question.
Just a moment before you go on here.
Yeah.
I'm an alumni of NYU. Has anyone made a formal response to NYU's Brain Center on this? Has True Vote done that?
There hasn't been a formal counter report, but True the Vote has taken interviews, as has, I believe, the Heritage Foundation and other liberty-minded groups taking apart the report through interviews. And it's an excellent question, and I'm glad you asked me that, because there is really no need to issue a counter white paper to say where you got all your facts wrong. All you have to do is listen to the logic on the underlying report. And their logic says, if you are a minority, odds are you are under the poverty line. And since that's the case, odds are you probably don't have a car. And if that's the case, you probably also don't have easy access to public transit. And you're probably living in a more rural area. So if you have to get a voter ID, which you probably don't have, and they don't really tell you how they got there to that conclusion, but you probably don't have one if you don't have any of those other things. If you don't have reliable public transit, then you're not going to be able to take time away from your job and get back in time, because bureaucrats might be too slow, and they actually say voter ID is a bad idea because of bureaucratic inefficiency. They admit that point. But you won't have ample time because of public transit to get back to your job, to get back from that voter ID office that took too much time. My question to the Brennan Center and anyone who holds up the Brennan report like it's the next gospel of anti-voter ID is that how did that person that couldn't take time away from that job sign an I-9 IRS form to get that job? Yes?
Nikki Haley tells a story after they reformed their law. They offer a free ride to get the free ID.
They malign that program in the report. South Carolina says, okay, you don't have a car, we don't have the monorail, we're sorry, but you need a ride to the DMV or wherever an ID issuing office is, call this 1-800 number. We will give you curbside service for free, and the ID is free as well. Less than 15 people took the state of South Carolina up on that offer. The Brennan Center criticized that offer from the state by saying that it might require up to 48-hour wait period. I'm quoting that from the Brennan Center. Another excellent, yes?
You know, a lot of this is really, on the other side of this issue, is really silly stuff, and obviously many Americans don't believe it. The point is that there are so many op-eds being written by the other side of this issue that are being printed in newspapers. Do you have a program by which you can encourage folks to be writing the newspapers, writing op-eds, to get the word out?
Absolutely. As our state leaders get periodic, confidential memos from the Houston office of True the Vote, and we give them those talking points, we give them breaking analysis so that they can formulate their own op-eds locally. What we also offer in our True the Vote newsletter, which you should all sign up for if you haven't done so yet, are analysis of the news that we have seen that week. So it's not just, hey, check us out in Florida this week, check us out in Denver in a couple of weeks, and a couple pictures, and that's your newsletter. No, it's analysis of the facts, and it's analysis of the press that we've seen that week and how you can counter that. And in that, we encourage people to take that information and write letters to their editor and their local boards and their local papers. That's the purpose of the newsletter, and that's what I'm really trying to drive it as. It's a document you can use every single week and turn it into an op-ed or a letter to the editor in your local paper. Because you're right, syndicated columns, Nobody reads the New York Times and the Washington Post, right? But those columnists, they get reprinted in hundreds of papers across the country every single day, every single week. People are spouting out in New York Times and Washington Post myths, and they don't even know where they came from, but that's where they start. The purpose of the newsletter is for me to read those papers so you don't have to, but tell you, here's what they're saying, here's how you can combat what they're saying, and then you can turn that into a letter to the editor in your local paper. If you work on the local side, being proactive on that, I'll work on the national side. Is that a good deal? All right. Yes?
Are you on top of something called Voter Participation Center?
In Virginia, yeah.
In Virginia, you find they send out probably 5 million mailers to children, pets,
Dead people.
dead people, mostly Virginia, probably, but at least one in Pennsylvania, where it goes, it looks like it's official. There's an address that looks like it goes back to the voter officials of the state, but that address is screwed up. And it wrong zip code, whatever, so that it'll actually go back to the return address, but the post office has no alternative. It sends back to the return address that's on there. It goes back to these people. And it has some things that you put in there, like your social security number, your
Right.
date of birth.
These forms, for those of you that weren't aware of the story, in Virginia, a DC-based nonprofit, the Voter Participation Center, had been sending out hundreds of thousands of pre-filled voter registration cards from some sensitive information on it. Yes, they're sending them to live people, but they're also sending them to dead people and pets. First of all, if that doesn't offend you on a voter integrity side, how we're just handing out voter registration cards with your information on it, if you care anything about identity protection, separate from voter integrity, you should be doubly offended. And that's exactly what's happening. What I can tell you is that Attorney General Ken Cuccinelli of Virginia has put an official inquiry on that. I know various campaigns operating in Virginia and elsewhere are also sicking their lawyers on the process as well. So it's not like we just figured it out and no one's doing anything about it. Local officials in the area are on the case, and True the Vote is so far comforted by how they're handling that. Yes.
I was wondering how you keep these letters to the editor that are based on your commentary from sounding like they were commonplace. Too many people read this evening.
Well, you have to be looking at a lot of letters to the editor pages to, first of all, claim that, oh, look, they're coordinating talking points. That's just not something you can always, people aren't going to have that kind of time. But the point is, repetition matters when it comes to voter integrity measures. Why do you think you're seeing op-ed after op-ed after op-ed? It's the same op-ed over and over, it's just different bylines, different newspapers, but they're all saying the same talking points. Repetition works. And it works when you go the other way with it as well. And it's pretty powerful when you start seeing letters to the editor pages filling up with a groundswell of proof that voter integrity matters. Yes.
I just want to make a comment. Most of these newspapers will filter letters to the editor. However, most of these newspapers have a comment section when they post an article on their website. And I would suggest you sign up and use that forum to tell the truth.
I would suggest as well, when you're doing that though, always be respectful. I'm not saying you're not, but that is just the caricature of the person that is sitting in a hotel ballroom worried about vote fraud and pushing for voter ID. People think you're wearing a tin hat. And you've got a fleet of black helicopters. You might even be one of the pilots. If you get on a comment board and you put 1,000 exclamation points on it and you start name calling, you call someone a liar, all that, just be civil, be respectful, state your facts, ask for a correction on something you see incorrect, and move on. But yes, be consistent about that, but always be respectful. Otherwise, you're going to play into that stereotype, and it's going to be cast over what everyone else is doing. Question?
Just back to your point about the voter participation survey. Raton County Election Commission, who's not exactly they actually had to put out a media release because those folks who know in Florida also. I'm not sure how widespread it was, but they were getting inundated with phone calls. And the press release was warning people that these were not state of Florida forms, they're not phone calls.
Right.
So I don't know how many states they're available to.
Well, the big news this week was Virginia. I'm sure next week we're going to be getting more information on that. But it's a good thing Virginia caught this first because you have a good attorney general in that state, and red flags went up all across Florida and other states that, you know, it's going to be close. So be thankful that Virginia caught this and not Iowa or Idaho. No offense to anyone from those states. All right. So when you're dealing with the press, you're going to see, as I said before, pay closer than close attention to how they're framing the questions. Because if you do that, you see a great opportunity, and many times, to turn the question back on them. And it bothers them. And when you do that well enough, and you do that often enough throughout the interview, you're going to find that they might barely quote anything you say, and it's probably going to be an all right quote, and there's not going to be much else about you. When a reporter comes at you with a hatchet, and you can tell in the questions, that's much better than answering the questions on their terms and then them having the last word. All right. You're at the polls. You're doing your thing. You're a poll watcher. You're making sure things are going smoothly. Someone approaches you with a camera, a notepad, audio recorder, something like that. They start asking you questions. What's your first response? Is it to answer them? No. Can I see your credentials? Are you a member of the press? If they don't have that, they better have a business card. If they don't have that, and they're still saying, I'm with, the Gazette, Journal, whatever, and they're still saying that, but they can't prove it, walk away. I've seen too many times, even in pretty secure areas with very high-profile people, a person walks in and says, I'm with the Washington Examiner, which is kind of a center-right editorialized paper, and gets all the way up to Andrew Breitbart, and then it's revealed that they work for Mother Jones or one of those other Think Progress, something like that. But they got through because they just kept saying, I'm with the Washington Examiner, I'm with the Weekly Standard, I'm with so-and-so, and no one asks for their credentials. And those mistakes are made in D.C., and you'd think they'd be better than that. But it happens. So when someone approaches you, ask for their credentials, ask for their business card, something like that. If they don't have it, you're not playing ball.
So you're asking for ID?
Oh, yeah, big surprise. This process starts now. When you're going to go out there, it doesn't matter in what capacity you're volunteering for a cause or where you're going to be, you need to be prepared for the possibility, it might not be a great one, but the possibility that you'll be approached by a reporter. Now, and when that happens, hold on one second. When that happens, you just need to have a quick list of talking points that you're comfortable with saying, that you don't have to go and really think about it. Just you got them right there, and you're good to go. And but most importantly, you want to think of questions that might be thrown at you where those talking points apply. So you want to interview yourself in your mind when you're coming up with those talking points. What was your question?
If you're in the polling, the area where everybody comes in for polling, you just said you're not supposed to have cameras in the end.
Depends on the state.
So how do they go in to bother someone that supposedly volunteered their time? You know what I mean? How do they get access in there when they shouldn't really be there?
Well, first of all, states such as Virginia, for example, I used to live in Virginia. TV cameras are set up in polling places. It doesn't matter. That's allowed there. So it depends on what state you're in, first of all. If you're in the polling place and you're volunteering for True the Vote, and there's someone in the media there, by God, they want to talk to you. Just count on that. If it's known that you work for True the Vote. Because our presence in the press so far is that we're putting up 1 million strong.
Yeah, but if you get in as, okay, True the Vote person, you have to be vetted to go in there that day, correct? You just can't walk in and say, I'm part of this. You have to go to a different class for that. It'd be like eating a poll worker, you go to classes.
Right, yeah, we have specific classes. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, go for it.
Okay, let me take sure. Right, so a couple things. The press and how they get in there. It's not legal for them to be in there. Okay, but we've come to a place in our system, not just in the polls, but in many, many places across our government largesse, that function on a wink and a nod. You know, well, I know they're not supposed to be, but who's really gonna stop them? And that's one of the things that you can do as a well-trained election worker is to be able to cite chapter and verse, which we provide to you with reference guides once you've gone through our training. It's not allowed. I mean, I understand. Okay. It's all great to go and see, your politician and his family cast their vote and all. That's great, but that's not legal. So we either play by the rules or we don't. If we want to have press in the polls, then let's make that official state code. Let's codify it. But, if it's illegal, it's illegal. And it's just standing your ground. It happens all too often that we just don't stand our ground. And then to your point about going in as a True the Vote poll watcher, it's a very important distinction. True the Vote does not put people in the polls. What we do is provide the training. You will be working on behalf of a party or a candidate or a resolution, sometimes it's on the ballot. So you're going in working on the behalf of whomever, whichever party you choose, whichever candidate you choose. We can help in certain cases facilitate those connections because we'll have candidates and parties come to us and say, do you have volunteers? But it's important to know that you're working on behalf of whatever stakeholder you're representing. We just provide the training.
Well, that's what I meant by, you're volunteering your time for something, and basically they can come and harass you, but that part is what, like you said, it's illegal.
Absolutely,
So
absolutely. And those are some of the very important distinctions that we make in the trainings and that we equip you with once you go inside the polls so that you know what your rights are and aren't. And that was all born out of our experiences in 2009 when you heard my story last night. We saw what we saw and we had no clue what to do.
Right.
You just see it, you go, I don't think this should be happening, but you don't know. And there is a proper chain of command that you should follow. And that's the core of what we want to teach.
Thank you.
All right. Any more questions on that one? All right. So, when you're dealing with a reporter, you've already kind of pre-interviewed yourself. You know where your talking points should go with what kind of questions that you can expect to be thrown at you. If you've done this right, then there should be no need for you to stammer and think and say, and so on. And more importantly, there should be no need for you to ramble on, because one thing you're taught in journalism school is to not stop a person answering your question. Because the longer they're going, the more the chance that they're going to trip up on their answer and say something they didn't really mean to say, and then they have an excellent probing question to follow up with you on. And that's where you really get into trouble. Brevity is your friend. And if you're using fillers like and don't put it past some of these guys to actually keep count of those or quote them in your quote just to make you sound stupid, because it's happened. Regardless of where you are, and this goes back to the credential question, you need to be mindful of where cameras are. If this could be, a camera on sticks back there like that, or someone with a phone or any kind of flip cam just recording you. And they might not even be saying anything, but that's something you just need to be aware of. And when that happens, odds are you're going to be in a public place. You can't tell them to stop as a point of law because you're out in public. But what you can say and do is just be nice to them, because they're looking for you to say something stupid, get angry, whatever, because that's what they're there for. But if you approach them, ask them, hey, are you with a media outlet? Do you have some questions for me? And obviously none of those are the case. Just be nice to them. Because as soon as you lose your cool because someone is filming you, you're going on YouTube. If you're just being a regular person standing there doing your job, then they've got nothing. And that's the way we want it. When an interviewer becomes hostile, and you're probably, with more of your newspapers and television, you're not going to get this so much. But if you're dealing with a blogger or someone that's putting that camera in your face, just walk away. It is your right to end the program. It's your right to end the interview. If you're in a legitimate interview where you have someone from your local paper and they're just going after you with questions and you don't know the answers to them, it's okay. My email address is up there. You can forward them on to me. There's no shame in saying, I don't have that information. I can connect you with someone who does. Don't be forced. Don't feel like you have to answer the question to kind of save face with that reporter, because that's where you get into serious trouble. Yes?
In Orange County, my husband and I both work the polls as regular poll workers. I'm an e-poll worker. I'm the one that hands out the ballots and checks the ID. He is what you call a poll deputy. Mm-hmm. And what he does is he has a badge. He looks like a regular Barney Fife. He stands outside. He stands outside within the 100 feet, but just there, and they don't let anybody in polls that aren't supposed to be.
That's great. We need more of them.
I'd like to add a contact with kind of what we call a peace officer that can work in the polls to take care of the situation. And one of the things that our reaction from Future Patriots, one of those recommendations that we came on, we found what was happening in 2010 is that some of the new black candidates were being appointed as peace officers. The judge had the authority to appoint them. So when we saw that happening, one of the pieces of legislation that Future Patriots put forward was to say, you must be TCO certified, which means you must have attended a Texas certification for law enforcement officer. So those are things that you're working with to be aware of. That, not just anybody can come in and be a police officer.
Right. He had to go through a background investigation.
Exactly. That's what it should have been. But be careful, like in some states, like in ours at the time, is that anybody could walk up and that judge could have the authority to say, here's the deputy to the police officer just going to handle things in a polling place.
All right, two hands in the back. This one first.
One thing that I would add to this is you always keep a piece of paper in your pocket and a pen in your pocket. And the aggressive ones that come toward you, and I myself, I'm not worried about the regular media. I think they'll be relatively fair and balanced. Those other ones, though, when they come at you, you take your pen and paper out and you look at them and say, one moment, could you give me your name, your contact information, and how I may reach you should I decide to do this interview?
Absolutely.
A lot of times, they will move along. Then if they continue to engage, if you wish to engage them, continue to be polite. And even with the regular media, one thing that I have always done and will continue to do, when I finish giving a quote, I look at them and say, now I would like for you to read that back to me so we can agree that that is what I said. And then you're good. That way you put them on notice in a kind manner.
Yeah.
Not to go out there and say, well, I was speaking to this idiot here today. And this is what this idiot said. You can protect yourself that way, but with a smile.
This question, I'm going to wrap it up.
Unfortunately, I'm a poll worker in Palm Beach County, and I am a deputy. And the instructions that I've gotten over the past 2 years is that you ask no questions of anybody working there. So anybody could walk in from the outside. My only responsibility is keeping the press or any Republican or Democratic Party or Independent Party outside the 100-foot where we put the yellow police tape around. As a deputy, I can't have a newspaper outside. that might say election today, because that's election area. So if anybody walked in, or a group walked in, coming off a bus, I could not ask where they're coming from and why they're there. We have to allow everybody in, because the rules are everybody gets to vote. And if you have no ID, or you don't have the proper identification, or you've moved, or you passed away 3 years ago, you can speak to the person that's running it, the clerk, and she will make her proper calls. I've worked 2010 elections where the computer did not match up to the actual ballots. And instead of leaving at 7, we were counting the actual ballots till 10 o'clock that night in North Palm Beach County. And I was handed a bunch of ballots to count it, one for Allen West, one for this person, one for this person, or whatever, with nobody watching. And this started in 2010. And then I said, maybe you all have to watch it very closely to be.
It's amazing.
Understandably, I understand what's happening, but some of the things that we're talking about doesn't happen when you're there. It's reality. And unfortunately, reality is what happens.
Well, that's the point of
We
here.
are not careful at all to watch. And what we're doing here today, I think, is great, and it has to continue. We have to spread the word. But the poll workers are important. The poll watchers are more important. And having 2 at every poll would be very difficult in Palm Beach County, where there might be 400 or more probably, 400 poll locations. They need an awful lot of people. But the idea is, in Palm Beach County, with our Commission of Elections, who told me that there is no such thing as voter fraud. And that was about a year and a half ago. There is such a thing as voter fraud. Thank you.
Let me wrap it up, and we'll take questions later. I don't know how we're doing on time. So, as I was saying, there is no shame in saying, I don't have that information, I can get it to you. Trust me, you'll probably feel pressured to answer that question anyway. But there are resources available to you. I'm available to you. My email address is up there, logan@truethevote.org. If you have some, and finally, what I want to leave you with, a very common tactic, and we've been seeing this with some of our state leaders in other areas, not in Florida yet, but it's been happening. A national outlet, I'm talking New York Times, The Nation, something of that nature, will call one of our local guys and have all of these very detailed questions about what it is that you've been trained to do, what do you do on a daily basis, but at the same time will have no clue, or they pretend to say, I don't really know who True the Vote is, if you can give us some information on that, what's your relationship with True the Vote, and so on. I'll give you publications to look out for: New York Times, The Nation magazine, and this news nonprofit called News 21. Those 3 outlets have been calling our state-trained leaders across the country, pretending to not know anything about True the Vote, but have some very interesting, well-researched questions about the group. Now, there's nothing to be afraid of with them. I mean, they're not trying to go after you or anything like that, and they'll be very polite, very friendly to you. They want to talk to you. But this tactic, the purpose of it is to see what they can get you to say in an interview, and then check that against what I would tell them, and check the discrepancy, because the discrepancy is the story. New York Times, The Nation, News 21, write them down. If you hear from them out of the blue, and odds are it might not happen to you, but if it does, don't follow your first impulse, which is, oh, this is so cool, New York Times is calling me. Because they're going to play on that. But take their questions, and please, please, please forward them on to me. It's not about me trusting your ability to handle the interview. It's about the fact that we've seen this systematically in other states, and we don't want to let them make a bad example of Florida or True the Vote nationally. That hasn't happened, but that's what we're protecting against. One last question.
Well, you also have to look out for
All right. Well, I'm going to pass it back to Catherine Engelbrecht, boss of True the Vote. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, I'm at the back.